Year 5, Part 2. It was spring, it was summer, it was September. It was almost another autumn. Pat had come home from a 3-week visit in Summerside, where Aunt Jessie had been ill and Pat had been keeping house for Uncle Brian. Now she was home again, and oh, it was good. Was the sunshine amber, or was it gold? How gallant the late hollyhocks looked along the dike. How alive the air was. What a delightful smell the apple orchard had in September. How adorable were 2 fat pussycats rolling in the sun. And the garden welcomed her, wanted her. Any news, Judy? Tell me everything that's happened while I've been away. Letters never tell half enough, and Ray's have really been sketchy. Oh, Ray! Judy looked rather as if the world were on its last legs, but Pat was too absorbed in Silverbush generally to notice it. Tillytuck coughed significantly behind his hand and remarked that Cupid had, as usual, been busy at Silverbush. "Oh, Peter and Bruce, I suppose," laughed Pat. "Is Ray going to keep those poor wretches dangling forever? It's really getting past a joke. Where is she, by the way?" "She did be climbing the haystack in the mince pie field half an hour ago, just after she did be getting home from school," said Judy, frowning at Tillytuck. Pat betook herself to the mince pie field, where a splotch of color on a half-used haystack betrayed Ray's whereabouts. Pat scrambled up the ladder, and Ray grabbed her. "Darling, I'm so glad you're back. It seems like 100 years since you went to Summerside. I've just been lying here, letting my thoughts ripen and grow mellow. I think there's a caterpillar on my neck, but it doesn't matter. Even caterpillars have rights." Pat slipped down beside Ray with a sigh of enjoyment. How blue the sky was, with those great banks of golden cloud in the south. Pat didn't like a cloudless sky. It always seemed to her hard and remote. A few clouds made it friendly, humanized it. How cool and delicious was the Gulf breeze blowing round them, bringing with it all kinds of elusive whiffs from all the little dells and slopes of the old farm. The buttercup field was a pasture this year. Pat remembered how she and Sid used to play in that field when the buttercup glory came up to their heads. "Isn't it heavenly just to lie quite like this and soak yourself in the beauty of the world?" she said dreamily. Ray did not answer. Pat turned her head and looked at her sister, lying in her lithe young slimness on the hay. How very soft and radiant Ray's eyes were. There was something about her. "Pat, darling," said Ray, "I'm engaged." Pat felt as if a thunderbolt had hit her. "Ray, let me see your tongue." "No, I'm not feverish, beloved. Really, I'm not." "Are you serious, Ray?" "Absolutely. Oh, Pat, I'm just weak and trembly with happiness. I never knew anyone could be so happy. It's only 3 weeks since you went away, but everything has changed. Pat, life has just seemed like a storybook these 3 weeks, and every day an exciting chapter." Pat had got her second wind, but she, too, felt weak and trembly with something that was not exactly happiness. "Which is it, Bruce or Peter?" she asked a bit dryly. Ray gave a young, delightful laugh. "Oh, Pat, it's neither of them. It's Brooke Hamilton." Pat felt stunned. "Who is Brooke Hamilton?" Ray laughed again. "Fancy anyone not knowing who Brooke Hamilton is. I can't believe I didn't know him myself 3 weeks ago. I met him the first night you went away, at Dot's dance." Ray Gardner, you don't mean to tell me you're engaged to a man you've known only 3 weeks? Don't go off the deep end, darling. We're not to be married till he's through college, so we'll have lots of time to get acquainted. And he's my man. There's no mistake about that. At 9 o'clock that evening, I had never seen him. At 10, I loved him. Judy says it happens like that once in 1,000 years. I never believed in love at first sight before, but now I know it's the only kind. Ray, I thought that once, too. I was sure I was madly in love with Lester Conway, and it was nothing but the moon. There wasn't any moon the night of Dot's party, so you can't blame this on the moon. I suppose, said Pat sarcastically, he's extremely handsome and you've fallen for... But he isn't. I think he's ugly, really, when I think of his face at all. But it's such a delightful ugliness, and he has such steady blue eyes, and such dependable broad shoulders, and such thick black hair, though it always looks as if he combed it with a rake, but I like that too. He wouldn't be Brooke if he had sleek hair. Dearest, it's all right. It really is. Mother and Dad like him, and even Judy approves of him. We're to be married when he's through college and go to China. China? Yes, he's going to take charge of the Chinese branch of his father's business there. I forgot to tell you he's one of the Halifax Hamiltons and Dot's cousin. But China? It does sound like a long hop, but really, darling, nothing matters. Indian plains or Lapland snows, so long as I'm with him. I don't talk like this to the others, Pat, but with you, I've just got to let myself go. And what about Bruce and Peter? Asked Pat, with a faint smile. Pat, it was really comical. Oh, there's so much to tell you. You see, they didn't know anything about Brooke, but they told me 2 weeks ago that I had to make up my mind between them, and I just told them I was engaged to Brooke. You should have seen their faces. Then they just faded out of the picture. I don't think they ever really existed. And you were engaged then? A week after you met him? Darling, we were engaged 3 days after we met. I couldn't help it. What would you do if Sir Lancelot just rode into your backyard and told you you had to marry him? Because Brooke didn't ask me, you know? He just told me I had to. There wasn't the least use objecting, even if I'd wanted to. And, oh, Pat, I cried. That's the shameful truth. I haven't the least idea why I did, but I simply howled. It was such a relief. I'd been thinking I was just one of the crowd to him, and Dot was trying to hint he was after Lenore Madison, that freckled snub-nosed thing. You may be sure I didn't ask for any time to consider. Pat, you're not going to cry? No, but this is really a little unexpected, Ray. For one awful moment, Pat had felt as if Ray, this Ray, were a stranger to her. She had been away from Silverbush for only 3 weeks, and this had happened. I know, Ray squeezed Pat's hand, and I know it must all seem like indecent haste to you, but if you count time by heart throbs, as somebody says you should, it's been a century since I met him. He isn't a stranger. He's one of our kind, like Hillary. Knows all our quacks. He really does. You'll understand when you meet him, Pat. Pat did understand. She couldn't find a single fault with Brooke Hamilton. As a brother-in-law, he was everything that could be desired. Tall, lean, with intensely blue eyes and straight black brows. Certainly, he and Ray made a wonderful-looking young pair in spite of his rather ugly face. She couldn't hate him as she had hated Frank, even if he were going to take her sister away. But mercifully, not for a long time yet, and there was no doubt that Ray loved him. I wish I could love somebody like that, said Ray, with a little pang of envy. She sat alone for a long time in her room that evening, while the robins whistled outside and the purple night sky looked down on her. So in the years to come, she would always have to sit alone. For the first time in her life, Pat felt old. For the first time, a little chill of fear for her own future touched her. She almost hated Bold and Bad for purring so loudly on the bed. It was outrageous that a cat should be so blatantly happy. Really, Bold and Bad had no tact. I suppose, thought Pat dolefully, the time will come when I'll have nothing left but a cat. Then she brightened up. And Silverbush. That will be enough, she added softly. At bedtime, she knelt by Ray's bed and put her arm across Ray's shoulder. "Cuddles, dear," she said, slipping back to the old nickname. "Brooke is a dear, and I think you're both lucky, and I love you, love you, love you." "Pat, you're the dearest thing in the world. And why didn't you cast the Reverend Wheeler of happy memory up to me and remind me of the time I thought I was in love with him? I really expected you to do it. I don't know how any human being could have resisted doing it." Judy was only moderately pleased over the engagement because of the prospect of China. Oh, I've great opinions of heathens, Patsy dear. They do be all right to send missionaries to, but not to be living among. And her with them looks of hers to go to Chiny. Sure, and some ugly girl would have done for him, I'm thinking, since he can't be contented in a civilized country. But I'm not denying he's a fine lad, and he can't be helping his uncle. Now, Judy, what about his uncle? Oh, it's an old tale, and better not raked up, maybe. Well, if you will be having it, the Hamiltons may be of Halifax now, but the grandfather of them lived in Charlottetown when his lads were small. And Brooke's uncle was the Black Shape, if it don't be insulting shape to call him so. Crooked he was as a dog's hind leg. He went out whilst after quarrelling with his dad, and what did he do but write a long account of his being killed when a train struck his horse and buggy at a crossing, and got it published in a little newspaper there. One of his wild cronies being editor of it, and sent a marked copy home to the old folks. It just about broke his poor mother's heart. I'm not saying his dad took it so hard, and small blame to him. And they had a lot of worry, telegraphing to have the body sent home. And when they went to the station with the hearse and undertaker and all to make the corpse, didn't me find Dickie Hamilton step off the train laughing at the joke he'd played on them. How horrible! But don't tell Ray that, Judy. Oh, it's not likely. Nor the sequel to it either. For what do you think, Patsy dear? The young scallywag did be killed the next week in the very same way he'd writ of. He was driving along one evening, reckless like, and the train struck him on that crossing of the West Road, and that was the end of him. Never be telling me it wasn't judgment. But there do be no doubting that Cuddles is over head and heels in love with Brooke. Sure, and there do be other men in the world, Cuddles, darling, I says, be way of teasing her a bit. There aren't, says she, solemn like. There's simply nobody else in the world, Judy, says she. And that being the case, we must just be making the best of it, uncle or no uncle. After all, there do be something real glamorous about it, as Tillytuck would say. As a matter of fact, all Tillytuck said was, "Engaged, by gosh!" Such a whirlwind courtship was entirely too much for Tillytuck. He relieved his feeling by playing on his fiddle in the graveyard, seated on Wild Dick's tombstone, much to Judy's horror. "How do you know Wild Dick doesn't still like to hear the fiddle, Judy?" asked Sid audaciously. "If Wild Dick do be in heaven, he has the angels to be listening to, and if he isn't, he do be having other things to think of," was Judy's indignant reply. Tillytuck had to give her his old red flannel shirt for the rosebuds in her new hooked rug before he could make his peace with her, and then nearly wrecked it again by solemnly telling little Mary, to whom Judy had just been relating a story of some naughty children who had been turned into brooms by a witch. "I was one of them brooms,"